stop just letting go. The Buddha said, "You must hold on first." When we meditate, we choose one object to focus on. In this case, the breath. If we're going to think, we think about the breath. What we're going to watch is the breath. We gather all these different mental activities around the breath. This is how the mind can become one. Once you've chosen the breath as your object, you try to stick with it. You hold on. We hear so much about the path being a path of letting go, but there are a lot of things you have to hold on to. You have to hold on to the basic principles that the Buddha said apply in all cases, which is that there are some actions that are skillful and should always be done, other actions that are unskillful and should never be done. So, we hold on to that principle. We may be holding on to a view, holding on to our ideas about how things should be done, but we're holding on for a purpose, not just holding on and staying there. The image the Buddha gives is of a raft. On this side of the river is danger, and on the other side of the river is safety. There's no bridge, there's no boat going across. So, you have to make a raft. You make a raft out of the twigs and branches you find on this side, and you tie it together well. Then, you make an effort to cross the river, holding on to the raft. You don't let go until you reach the other side. When you do get to the other side, that's when you can let it go. You don't want to be foolish enough at that point to carry the raft on your head because you've reached safety. But until you reach safety, you've got to hold on. So, when we think about the Buddha's principles about what should and shouldn't be done, we have to remember that he said, this is one of a teacher's most important gifts to his students. A clear sense that certain actions are skillful and that you have the ability to choose to do them. Other actions are unskillful, and you have the ability to choose not to do them. You hold on to that principle. Anything else that'd get in the way, anything that'd be contrary to that, that's what you let go. That's your raft. As the Buddha said, we can train the mind to think nothing but skillful thoughts. He compares it to being a cowherd. Back in the old days, if you had cows, you had to be very careful during the rainy season because rice was growing in the paddies. You wanted to make sure your cows didn't get into the rice, because if they did get into the rice, they'd eat the rice and there'd be a lot of trouble. So if they're heading toward the rice, you have to beat them back. Whatever is needed to stop them, you do that. As for skillful thoughts, he says it's like being a cowherd during the dry season. The rice has been gathered. There's no danger. The cows can go into the fields, and there's nothing for them to eat, nothing for them to destroy, so they can wander as they like. But, as the Buddha noted, you can think skillful thoughts all day, and there'd be no danger coming from that, aside from the fact that you get tired. When the mind gets tired, it's far from concentration, and it's very easy to start giving in to unskillful thoughts again, so you get the mind to rest in concentration. So, you need this as your source of strength, the ability to stay right here, and you want to hold on to this. Here again, you're holding on to a way of doing things, but you're holding on with the purpose, ultimately, of arriving at another place and then letting go. That's the difference. If you hold on to an activity simply for the sake of holding on, there's going to be suffering. The Buddha identifies suffering as clinging to the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perceptions, thought fabrications, consciousness. And there are 4 ways of clinging. You can cling in terms of sensual pleasure, sensual desire. You can cling in terms of your views. You can cling in terms of your ideas of what should and shouldn't be done. And then you can cling in terms of your sense of who you are, all of which you can create out of these aggregates. And that's suffering. But the path to the end of suffering also involves aggregates. For instance, you're sitting right here, focused on the breath. That's the body, or form. You're trying to breathe in a way that gives rise to a feeling of pleasure. That's feeling. You hold in mind your image of how the breath runs through the body, and you try to choose a perception that allows the breath energy to flow freely, so that the sense of ease you get from the breathing can flow throughout the whole body. That's perception. You talk to yourself about which ways of breathing are skillful, which ways of breathing are not, and how you might change things. Once the breath is comfortable, how do you maintain that sense of comfort? And when you can maintain it, how do you let it spread? All that talking to yourself is fabrication. Then there's consciousness, which is aware of all these things. So you've got the 5 aggregates right here in your state of concentration. As for the types of clinging, you do have views about what's right and wrong. You do have ideas about what should and shouldn't be done. And you do have a sense of yourself as being competent, able to do this. So, in this sense, you're still clinging, but you're clinging in a skillful way. As for clinging to sensuality, the Buddha says that has no role in the path, but the mind does have a desire for pleasure. This is why we give rise to pleasure in the concentration. I don't know how many times have I heard people say, "Watch out for concentration. There's going to be a sense of pleasure and happiness. You're going to get addicted. You're going to get attached. So it's better not to do concentration at all." Well, the Buddha wasn't one of those people. He actually made right concentration an essential part of the path. As he said, you can't get past sensuality unless you have a pleasure, like the pleasure that comes from being absorbed in the breath. If you don't have that pleasure, or a higher one, then the mind goes sneaking back to its old pleasures, or worse, in sensuality. So, to get past sensuality, you have to have a sense of well-being with concentration. You have to be able to hold on to that. So, there are things you have to hold on to. Think of the raft again. If you're in the middle of the river and someone says, "Well, the people who've reached the other side let go," you try to let go to show that you're at the end of your course across the river. And of course, you're going to get swept downstream. There's actually a Mahayana text that says, you have to let go of the raft in order to get across the river. I've never seen any raft work like that. When we understand the Buddha's teachings, it's not just a matter of understanding lists of words. It's good also to think about the analogies that he gives, so that we can get a correct understanding of what we should and shouldn't do. This is where the raft analogy comes in, that it is important to hold on. Eventually, you let go. You're holding on to the raft, and as you're holding on to the raft, you're letting go of a lot of other things. But there are some things you have to hold on to in order to get to the safety. So don't be embarrassed about holding on. If someone tells you that this is a kindergarten practice, well, there are a lot of good things you can learn in kindergarten, and it's best to make sure that you've got your foundation solid and your understanding solid so you're not easily deceived. I've noticed that the people who get deceived about the nature of the path are the ones that are told, just let go. Your mind is not in concentration. Well, that doesn't matter. Let go of your desire for concentration. That's laziness speaking. There are a lot of people who like to think that they're clever, they're intelligent, they don't need to deal with the basics, and they can go straight to the top. But if you go straight to the top, it's like climbing a ladder without any rungs. You climb and climb and climb, and you just fall down. And it's very easy to get deceived about what's at the top, because all you're doing is based on your preconceived notions about what's advanced. But you're not really going to know those things until you've got the foundations really solid. Like when we work on concentration, it's based on mindfulness, and mindfulness is based on right view, and also on virtue. Why is that? Because following the precepts teaches you to be honest. If you're really going to stick with the precepts, you have to keep them in mind. That's mindfulness. You have to be alert to what you're doing. That's alertness. And you have to be ardent in trying to do this well, sticking to the precepts. And be honest with yourself. If you've broken a precept, admit the fact so you can learn from it. You figure out, why did I break that precept? Just the other day, I received a phone call from a woman who had intentionally killed a mosquito. It disturbed her. She had taken the precepts for a long time. She hadn't intentionally killed anything for a long time. Then one day she was out in the garden, the mosquitoes got to her, and she found herself deliberately killing a mosquito. Some of her friends said, well, it doesn't matter. A mosquito is just a tiny thing. But if you say it doesn't matter, then you start getting dishonest. Then other things don't matter either. You have to ask yourself, what in the mind says that it's okay to kill? Because if it's okay to kill a little something like that, then it can go to bigger and bigger things, and the mind becomes dishonest. When the mind is dishonest, whatever insights you gain from your concentration are going to be dishonest too. So hold on to the basics. You've got that raft, and it's the same raft from the beginning of this side of the river over to that other side of the river. It's the raft of the Noble Eightfold Path, which boils down to virtue, concentration, and discernment. All three of those are going to be required to take you all the way across. Those are the things you hold on to. And don't be embarrassed that you're holding on, because when you hold on to these things, it allows you to let go of all kinds of other things. The other things that come sweeping down the river, you don't have to hold on to them. You hold on to what will take you to safety. Once you've arrived, that's when you can totally let go. So have a clear sense of time and place in your holding on, time and place in your letting go. That's how you can be said to be wise. The Raft of Jhana. There's a tendency when you hear the word jhana to think of some otherworldly state, something far removed from the mind as you're experiencing it right now. But what is jhana made out of? In the passage we chanted just now, from the analysis of the path, it says that in the first jhana there's directed thought, evaluation, pleasure, and rapture. What makes these faculties different from your ordinary directed thought and evaluation, your ordinary feelings of pleasure, and sometimes of rapture? It's that you're bringing them together to one thing. But you're using habits, abilities, tendencies that you already have, so it's not so otherworldly after all. What this means is that you've got to take the habits you have and you've got to change them. Like directed thought and evaluation, that's the Buddha's analysis for our way of talking to ourselves. We focus on a topic and make comments on it in our minds. Then, of course, we break into speech. To get into jhana, we have to learn how to take the language of our comments, the way we frame issues, how we interact with our thoughts, and the ways in which we evaluate things and make them more skillful. This is one of the reasons why right speech is a factor of the path. It's going to give you practice in how to talk to yourself. Both right speech and right concentration are very directly connected to right resolve. The resolve to practice for renunciation, in other words, to stay away from sensuality, for non-ill will, and for harmlessness, in other words, for goodwill and for compassion. Right resolve in one direction goes to right speech. Try to make sure that your speech is compassionate. The Buddha asks that it be true, that it be beneficial, that it be timely. You've got to keep careful watch over your speech. For so many of us, speech is like a faucet. You're not really sure what's inside the faucet, so you turn it on to see what's going to come out. But as the Buddha taught Rahula, you have to think before you speak. When I say this, what are the results going to be? Is it going to be harmful? Is it going to be harmful for the community? Harmful for the person I'm talking to? Harmful for myself? We have this fascination with our opinions. We think that intelligence is measured by how many opinions we can have. But when you come to the practice of the Dhamma, you have to think of intelligence in another way. Intelligence in terms of seeing where your thoughts are coming from and where they're going to go, what they lead to, and realizing that what may seem like a really great thought or something that someone else has to hear may not be so intelligent or necessary after all in the terms that the Buddha applies, or it may be a good thing to say, but right now is not the right time to say it. You have to think about these things because you need to get this process of directed thought and evaluation under control if it's actually going to become a factor of the first jhana. Because right concentration is the other factor that branches right out of right resolve. The Buddha has a definition for transcendent right resolve, and it basically comes down to the directed thought and evaluation that gets you into jhana. Again, it's based on renunciation, non-ill will, harmlessness. This is more directly focused inside, but the way you deal with other people is going to have an impact on how you talk to yourself, the way you talk to them, the kinds of things you think about, the ways you comment on things is going to have an impact on the way you talk to yourself, the way you direct your thoughts, evaluate things as you're sitting here with your eyes closed. So it's good to be very careful about your speech. Then, when the time comes to settle down and you're ready to focus on the breath, you've got these processes trained so that they will look at what's actually going on, making sure that the things you say to yourself are true and beneficial and timely. It becomes simply a matter of focusing on your breath and learning how to talk to yourself about the breath without getting too wound up in thoughts about how things are not settling down as quickly as you'd like, and especially not in the thoughts that go from there to say, well, maybe I'm just a miserable meditator and it's never going to happen. Just forget about that. That's framing your directed thoughts and evaluation in the wrong way. If anything, you just remind yourself this is something that can be done. It just takes a different kind of intelligence, not smart's intelligence, but the intelligence of noticing what kind of breathing is good and what kind of effects it's going to have on the body, the effects it's going to have on the mind. You're really giving yourself over to this issue. How can I get the mind to stay with the breath? How can I get the breath to act as a glue to keep the body with the mind, right here in the present moment? How can I learn to question the breath in a way that makes it interesting? If you have any recurring illnesses or injuries, see what the breath can do for those. Maybe there's a part of the body that tends to be tight, where things are pulled out of alignment. Can you breathe in ways, conceive of the breath in ways that actually help bring things back into alignment? Think about the breath energies that a John Lee says surround the body, not just the ones in the body, but all around. How do you sense those? How do you get use out of them? Because that's the whole point of this. You want to make this conversation inside beneficial. Where does this internal conversation come from? It comes from your tendency to talk to yourself and then break into speech with others. It's important to realize that as we practice, we're building on habits we already have, using things that we've already been using, like the aggregates. As the Buddha says, when the mind gets settled in, and you get really good at this, you start analyzing the state of concentration in terms of the 5 aggregates. Now, we all know that the aggregates are inconstant, stressful, and not self. But for the sake of the concentration, you're going to make them more constant, easeful, more under your control. They can't become totally easeful. After all, if they were totally easeful, they would be nibbana. There will be some stress in there. In fact, one of the big insights once you've gotten used to really appreciating the pleasure of a concentrated mind is coming around to the fact that even here there are ups and downs. There is some inconstancy. Even this is imperfect. That's how you can go beyond it, which is one of the reasons why, when the Buddha talked about getting across the river, he used the image of a raft you build, not an image of a nibbana yacht coming over to pick you up. You take twigs, sticks, leaves, and branches, and you tie them together with vines, all of which you find on this shore. It may not look all that pretty, it may not be perfect, but it's good enough to get you across. If you had to wait until everything is nicely planned and beautifully fitted, you'd be eaten alive. In the Buddha's image, there are snakes and vipers and thieves on this side of the river. You've got to get out of there as soon as you can. So you take what you've got. In this case, it's simply the way the mind talks to itself. Well, you learn how to talk yourself into jhana. And even though jhana is made out of aggregates, and the aggregates are inconstant, stressful, and not self on a very subtle level, still they're good enough to get you across. So the raw materials may not be perfect, but you do try to get the twigs that will float, the branches that will float. You don't want to build a raft that's going to sink down into the bottom of the river. In other words, you've got to learn how to be more skillful in the habits you already have, both on an external level and on an internal level. But what it comes down to is just the mind talking to itself until it gets to a point of equilibrium where it doesn't really feel any need to talk to itself anymore. That's when you can go into deeper levels of concentration. But to lasso the mind into the present moment is going to require some internal talking. So develop good habits in your external speech. Have a clear sense of what's the right time and place, what's true, what's not true, what's beneficial, what's not beneficial, all the qualities of right speech. Those qualities will then carry over into internal right speech that can get the mind to settle down. This means that when the mind is concentrated, there's still you in there, but it's a you that's been trained. So take all aspects of the training seriously. When the Buddha set out the Noble Eightfold Path, he didn't choose 8 factors because he liked the number 8. These factors were all necessary. So make sure you've got them all covered.